On a quiet morning in West Derby, something that seemed ordinary turned into chaos within minutes. A delivery van stopped outside a house on a residential street. One person stepped out wearing courier clothes. Behind him, 3 more emerged with covered faces. What followed took only 4 minutes, but ended with serious injuries and cocaine worth £1 million disappearing. The property wasn't random. It served as a storage location for the Huyton Firm, one of Merseyside's most dangerous criminal organisations. Vincent Coggins controlled this operation, and his reputation included brutal tactics and making people vanish. The person inside the house stayed silent afterward, but information was already spreading. Someone knew exactly what had been stolen, and what price would be demanded for its return. When the right information reached certain people, a desperate father came forward with an extraordinary offer. This story shows how one man spent £1.3 million trying to protect his son from a murder plot he had nothing to do with, and how the criminals who accepted the money still wanted revenge. Everything started with careful preparation. 4 individuals used a white van, with one pretending to deliver a package. The others hid nearby, masked and carrying weapons. They had studied the house on Crockdale Road West for several weeks. They understood what waited inside, not residents, but valuable products. Around 9:30 in the morning on May 23, 2020, they made their move. Paul Glenn and his son answered the door. Immediately, machetes appeared. Glenn suffered deep cuts. His son attempted to fight back, but couldn't stop them. Blood covered the entrance. The building had no obvious markings, but people in that world knew its purpose. It was a storage depot. The attackers loaded approximately 30 kilograms of cocaine, valued over £1 million, and disappeared quickly. What they failed to realize was whose property they had just violated. This wasn't just any storage location. It belonged to the Huyton Firm, a Merseyside criminal network built over many years by Vincent and Francis Coggins. Their distribution channels connected South America through Spain into the United Kingdom. Someone had just robbed them directly. By early evening that same day, Coggins reviewed security footage obtained from a neighbour's camera system. 4 masked figures, a waiting vehicle, and his merchandise gone. His reaction was explosive. He told his associates this felt personal, believing no local group would dare target him directly. He suspected betrayal from within, thinking someone felt confident enough to steal from the Huyton Firm and survive. He demanded names immediately. However, the robbers weren't from Liverpool. Jason and Craig Cox, 2 brothers from Salford, had partnered with Richard Caswell, an experienced local criminal. The 4th person, Ben Monks Gorton, played the fake delivery driver. Coggins didn't have this information yet. The actual thieves were already selling the stolen drugs, while the Huyton Firm prepared to hunt the wrong target. Vincent Coggins acted quickly. He wanted payback. Within hours, he was using encrypted messaging under the username Moonlit Boat. His language seemed calm, but the message was deadly. He instructed Paul Woodford, Robert Jarvis, and Michael Earl to start investigating. If they couldn't discover who took the drugs, they would pursue every rumor until someone admitted guilt. Initial suspicions focused on Kenny Glenn, the son of the stash house victim. Then, Paul Flynn's name appeared. Then, silence. Then, everything changed direction. Without clear evidence, Coggins became fixated on a different local dealer, Brian Maxwell Jr. There was no connection, no reason, no proof he was present. Maxwell Jr. wasn't unknown in these circles. Young, smart, and always near his father, he operated quietly. For Coggins, that was sufficient reason. He sent encrypted messages filled with violent intentions. He claimed he had identified Maxwell as responsible and made clear the stolen money no longer concerned him. What he wanted now was blood. When Woodford questioned whether weapons were necessary, Coggins answered that he'd already prepared them. They were ready, armed and waiting. He used street code asking for a pineapple, meaning a hand grenade. Jarvis confirmed he could obtain one. They had moved beyond speculation. They were arming themselves for action. The strategy was straightforward. Find Maxwell Jr., strike fast, and send a message. Brian Maxwell Sr. wasn't publicly famous, but in criminal networks, his reputation was strong. A quiet operator without a large crew or drama, he owned multiple houses. He purchased them cheaply, rented them out, and converted them for large-scale cannabis cultivation. Lights operated on timers, lawns were maintained weekly. He even paid gardeners to hang flower baskets outside to create the appearance of normal homes. Inside told a different story. Upper floors were emptied, walls filled with growing equipment and heat lamps positioned carefully. Ground floors remained furnished to maintain appearances. Every detail was managed, including empty driveways with parked vehicles. The operation wasn't flashy, but it was efficient and profitable. His son, Brian Maxwell Jr., grew up understanding this business and was trusted with responsibilities. By 2020, they worked together closely, handling supply and distribution quietly, communicating face-to-face or through encrypted devices. When Maxwell Sr. heard his son's name mentioned in whispers as the person behind a £1 million robbery he knew his boy never committed, everything changed. Maxwell Sr. demanded evidence from his son. Maxwell Jr. had proof. Security camera footage showing he never left home that day, with clear timestamps. Still, the danger didn't disappear. Coggins didn't care about facts because the accusation had already taken hold in their minds. Now his son faced a death sentence. Maxwell Sr. made a critical decision. He understood Coggins and how men in this world operated. If the price was right, agreements could be reached. He told his son to stay hidden and started negotiations through someone both sides trusted. His proposal was direct. Land, property and cash, totaling over £1.3 million in exchange for his son's life. He wasn't seeking forgiveness or trying to win arguments. He simply wanted to keep his son alive. The offer reached Vincent Coggins through an intermediary. Brian Maxwell Sr. requested a meeting, or at least wanted his message delivered. He knew his son wasn't involved in robbing the stash house. He had video evidence proving it, but he also understood that truth no longer mattered. He told the gang to consider it full payment. From that moment forward, he would accept the blame himself. Coggins agreed, at least officially. The transfer happened, ownership documents changed hands, money was delivered. On June 3, 2020, the transaction completed. But privately, Coggins continued expressing rage through encrypted messages. He informed his inner circle that despite accepting the deal, nothing had actually changed. Maxwell Jr. remained a target. He just wouldn't act immediately, not while police attention was high. In one message, he mentioned the father could be left alone temporarily, but his intention was to return when circumstances improved and finish what started. Maxwell Jr., unaware that danger still existed, stayed in hiding. His father, believing he had purchased safety, remained quiet and never attempted to recover the money. But criminal activity continued. Behind the scenes, the machinery of revenge kept operating. Because in the Huyton Firm's world, financial debts could be settled. But disrespect, even when imagined, required punishment. To understand why that agreement was never going to last, you need to know who the Coggins brothers really were. Not just angry criminals, but builders of one of the most violent and organized crime groups Merseyside had experienced. Before the robbery, before the payment, and before encrypted communications exposed them, the Huyton Firm had already secured its position near the top. It started on the Cantrell Farm estate in Merseyside, an area devastated by industrial collapse and filled with poverty. In that environment, something else grew. Vincent and Francis Coggins learned early that power didn't come from social status. It came from fear. Over 30 years, they constructed an empire. At its height, the Huyton Firm operated a nationwide network. Cocaine and heroin moved from Spain into Liverpool, then distributed to Scotland and down to Plymouth. Encrypted messages revealed transactions involving over 140 kilograms of cocaine and nearly 250 kilograms of heroin within just 3 months. The actual amounts were probably higher, but drugs were only the surface. What maintained the organization was violence. Men were employed specifically to cause harm. One of them, Thomas Cashman, would later be convicted of killing 9-year-old Olivia Pratt Corbell. Others served as enforcers, couriers, and handlers, all controlled through a command structure that led directly to the brothers. Vincent managed Merseyside operations. Francis, believed to be operating from Costa del Sol, supervised European logistics. Their associates included Paul Woodford, connected to previous shootings, and Robert Jarvis, a long-term fixer with international connections. The brothers operated through multiple layers, rarely visible, never careless. When they communicated, it was through encrypted usernames: Moonlit Boat, Soft Herb, King Wasp. Personal photographs, location information, and digital traces would eventually reveal their identities. To competitors, they seemed untouchable. To their own organization, they were feared. But like all established criminal networks, it wasn't paranoia that destroyed them. It was overconfidence, the belief that nobody was monitoring them, and faith in a communication system they thought was secure. In early April 2020, French and Dutch authorities secretly compromised the EncroChat network. Without alerting users, they captured messages in real time, including thousands sent by the Coggins brothers and their crew. That intelligence went directly to the UK's National Crime Agency and the Northwest Regional Organised Crime Unit. From that point, everything shifted. Operation Sub-Zero gathered over 72,000 messages. Every threat, every transaction, every plan was recorded. The NCA didn't just collect information, they worked systematically. Each message was matched with metadata, locations, timestamps, and even background photographs. Usernames like Moonlit Boat, Soft Herb, Olive Scooter, and Blade Hedge were gradually connected to real people. Often the crew made it simple by joking about meals, sharing photos, and discussing their daily activities too casually. What began as surveillance became a live intelligence stream. While the firm continued planning attacks, police quietly constructed their cases. Threats against Brian Maxwell Jr. and 2 others, Michael Ease and Ayabosa Igbenovia, were monitored as they happened. By late May 2020, the threat had escalated beyond words. The plan was active. Inside the Northwest Regional Organised Crime Unit, detectives made a crucial decision. This couldn't wait for scheduled arrests, not if someone was about to be murdered. They acted immediately. On May 27, 2020, police arrived at Maxwell Jr.'s residence. He received an Osman warning, an official document informing him his life was in danger. Officers took identical steps with the 2 other men Coggins had identified. Then came the second phase of the plan. Coggins, Woodford, Earl, and Jarvis were each served with disruption notices, formal warnings from law enforcement designed to send a clear message. You are under surveillance, and any move you make will be met with force. The objective was simple: delay the violence. For a brief moment, it worked. Michael Earl appeared to retreat, unsettled by the growing pressure. But Vincent Coggins wasn't finished. Behind the scenes, surveillance intensified. This was no longer just about disruption. Investigators were now focused on completing the case. As the firm tried to stay one step ahead, police quietly moved into the final phase. Arrests were coming. They just had to come before someone was killed. For weeks, the firm had been hunting the wrong people. The men who actually carried out the robbery were already gone. As previously discussed, Jason and Craig Cox and Richard Caswell were at the center of it. It was Caswell who had tipped them off. He maintained contact with the firm, pretending ignorance, claiming he was trying to uncover the truth. In reality, he was feeding information back to the Cox crew, keeping them ahead of any retaliation. For a while, the deception held. Then the EncroChat data arrived. Messages recovered under Operation Venetic exposed Caswell's true role. His communications showed direct contact with the Cox brothers before and after the robbery. He wasn't a bystander. He was the inside man. Once that evidence began circulating, retaliation followed. Caswell, already in custody on an unrelated matter, was attacked in prison and slashed across the face. The Cox family were issued threat-to-life warnings. Properties in Salford were targeted in arson attacks. Jason and Craig Cox fled to Spain. By the time Coggins realized the truth, the damage was irreversible. At that point, the firm was no longer focused on revenge. It was focused on survival. The case was complete. Every message, image, and instruction had been traced and preserved, forming a full operational blueprint of how the Huyton Firm functioned. The takedown was authorized under Operation Sub-Zero, led by the Northwest Regional Organized Crime Unit as part of the wider EncroChat response. At 6 a.m. on June 16, 2020, the doors came off. Armed raids across Liverpool and Knowsley led to the arrests of Vincent Coggins, Robert Jarvis, Paul Woodford, and Michael Earl. Days later, Paul Fitzsimmons, Kevin Rimmer, Dean Burrows, and Darren Tierney were taken into custody. In Amsterdam, after 2 years on the run, Paul Glenn was arrested and extradited. Brian Maxwell Sr. and Jr. were also captured. The arrests came quietly. No warnings, no headlines. The firm collapsed in real time. Over the following year, charges mounted, trials began, and guilty pleas arrived in waves. The court heard how the firm trafficked hundreds of kilograms of heroin and cocaine across the UK, used hand grenades as leverage, and plotted executions over lost profits. More than 72,000 EncroChat messages were analysed and directly linked to real-world crimes, including weapons purchases, property movements, and planned attacks. It marked the first time this volume of encrypted data had been tested in UK courts. The defence attempted to have it excluded. They failed. Judges ruled the evidence admissible, setting a precedent that would affect hundreds of future EncroChat prosecutions nationwide. The Coggins brothers, once untouchable, were now front-page criminals. One in custody, one still abroad. A network built over 3 decades lay in ruins. It took more than 3 years to bring the case to its conclusion. Dozens were arrested, some fought the charges, others pleaded early. Once the EncroChat evidence stood, the outcomes were inevitable. Vincent Coggins, 58, received 28 years for directing large-scale drug trafficking and orchestrating violence from behind encrypted screens. Robert Jarvis, 59, once viewed as merely an enforcer, was exposed as a core operator. He was sentenced to 25 years after a full trial. Paul Woodford, 58, received 24 years and 6 months. Evidence showed he sourced firearms, arranged attacks, and managed bulk cocaine shipments. Michael Earl, 48, was sentenced to 11 years. Paul Fitzsimmons, 60, received 12 years and 6 months. Darren Tierney, 46, was handed 12 years and 9 months. Kevin Rimmer received 16 years. Dean Burrows was sentenced to 14 years and 3 months. Paul Glenn, 59, who managed the stash house that was robbed, received 11 years and 2 months for conspiracy to supply cocaine. Those responsible for the robbery itself, Jason Cox, Craig Cox, Richard Caswell, and Ben Monks Gorton were prosecuted separately under Operation Jail by Greater Manchester Police. Jason Cox received 14 years and 8 months. Craig Cox's sentence was reduced on appeal from 13 years and 6 months to 11 years. Caswell was sentenced to 7 years. Monks Gorton received just under 7 years. Then came the Maxwells. Brian Maxwell, Sr., who paid the ransom, received 13 years for conspiracy to supply cannabis. His son, Brian Maxwell Jr., was sentenced to 18 years and 2 months, largely for firearms offences. The court heard he had attempted to source an AR-15 and an AK-47 while in hiding, convinced retaliation was still coming. The £1.36 million ransom paid by Maxwell Sr. was never recovered. Seized under the Proceeds of Crime Act, it may never be returned. If you followed this case from start to finish, we want to hear your thoughts. Did the sentences fit the crimes? Was justice served, or did some walk away too lightly? Let us know in the comments. And for more real crime stories like this, subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a like. There's always another case waiting to be uncovered.